This is Continuum Drag, a weekly podcast revisiting television sci-fi, fantasy, and everything in between. This week, Kolchak the Night Stalker, episodes 1 and 2.
If by chance you happened to be in the Windy City between May 28th and June 2nd of this year, you would have had very good reason to be terrified. During this period, Chicago was being stalked by a horror so frightening, so fascinating, that it ranks with the great mysteries of all times. It's been the fictional subject of novels, plays, films, even an opera. Now, here are the true facts.
Welcome to Continuum Drag, the podcast wearing tennis shoes and a $2 hat. I'm Luke, here with my co-host Jordan. What's real, Jordan?
What's real? You were sitting on your brains. Remember that line? I like that as an insult. I'm going to use it from now on. You're sitting on your brains.
That's right. Well, this week we're starting a new series. We're watching Kolchak the Night Stalker.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, Jordan, I knew a little, like I knew it I didn't know the show, but I knew its name and that it existed. But that I realized coming into it, I maybe thought it was a detective show. I did not know it was a reporter show.
Yeah, I didn't either. I thought it was going to be sort of like a hard-boiled detective show from the 70s representing the 30s or whatever. But it's not really. It's sort of this slightly anachronistic 1970s investigative reporter Monster of the Week show. It's really fun.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because we had discussed doing it during our like little 3-month stop down. We were talking about what sort of longer series to do, and this one had ended up winning the pile. Mm-hmm. And there were 2 TV movies that came out before the series.
That's right.
And we decided not to watch those, but during that 3 months when I had all that downtime, I did watch both TV movies.
Oh, did you?
So I know all the backstory now.
Now, let me ask you, because I haven't watched them, does it color or illustrate things better having watched those movies?
I mean, here's what I would say is in the original The Night Stalker and then the follow-up to The Night Strangler, it does introduce basically a Kolchak, and actually Vincenzo is in both of those as well. Mm. And I don't think you're missing anything. I think they largely cover it here for the most part. The one thing that I was excited about, Jordan, which you won't know about, is that Night Stalker, the original film, took place in Las Vegas, and it was very cool. Actually, they really use Las Vegas very well.
Mm-hmm. This is Chicago.
He's hunting a vampire, and at the end of the episode, he gets run out of town. Or the end of the movie, he gets run out of town. So in the next movie, he's in San Francisco, where Vincenzo is also got a new newspaper job, and him and Vincenzo do another crime, and then both he and Vincenzo get run out of San Francisco. So I was just like, where are they going to end up in the TV show? I've seen them run out of 2 cities now.
So despite their slightly combative relationship, they're enough of a team that they just go from city to city together. Like anytime Vincenzo gets a job, he's like, hey, this guy's coming with me.
Well, basically, at the end of Night Stalker, Vincenzo didn't go with him, but they happened to bump into each other in San Francisco, and Vincenzo felt so bad for Kolchak, he gave him another job, and that really fucked up Vincenzo's life, and now they're stuck together.
Right.
They're a funny team. You don't get to see it as much in these 2 episodes, I don't think, but they are kind of a funny, like, newspaper editor reporter team. It's very much like a put upon like police chief in a lot of ways.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. That's very similar to what this is. It's a Kolchak's a reporter who sort of always goes off his assignment so he can investigate what he wants to. He's a loose cannon. Yeah, he's a loose cannon, and he basically always is investigating some sort of paranormal type monster. Fantastical element is what he's always kind of looking for. And Vincenzo's like, Kolchak, I told you to do a story on Staples or whatever it is, you know?
I find it very funny that Vincenzo's always having to bail him out for various charges that have been put against him by the police. Yeah,
it is funny because it's very much that sort of cop show that you're used to, but they've just replaced it with reporters.
Yeah, it's kind of it takes a weird change that way because like they really hate the cops in this show, so it's quite clear they would never use a cop as a lead character.
Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, so this aired on ABC between September 14th, 1974 and March 28th, 1978. And Jordan, would you like to know what was happening in the world?
I would love to know what's happening in the world at this time.
During Kolchak? So I got a few things for you because this is a longer show, so a few more things happened. One of the things that happened is something I cannot read in my own handwriting, which is amazing.
Are you reading like a murder note from the Zodiac Killer or something? You can't figure it out?
Yeah, here's what I wrote down. January 6th, 1975, Wall of Fortune Pregress. Oh, I know what it is now. It says January 6th, 1975, Wheel of Fortune premieres.
I see. Hey, this is a dumb question, and maybe you don't know this. Was Pat Sajak still the host then? I don't think he was.
That's what my other note says. That's how I figured it out. It was Chuck Woolery.
Oh, it was Chuck Woolery. Yeah, I know who Chuck Woolery is.
Yeah, it was a daytime show when it started.
Yeah, he's dead now, I'm pretty sure.
Probably. January 15th, 1975, Space Mountain opens at Disney World.
I've never been to Disney World, have you?
I have. As a child, it was fun.
Yeah.
Space Mountain's a good ride.
You just go in and out of mountain, I'm assuming?
It's what it is it's all basically in pitch black, so you have no idea what's happening, so it's a lot of fun.
I see. Oh, good for those kids in the 70s.
February 4th, 1975, the first successful earthquake is predicted. Or predicted earthquake, something like that.
Right. They have first be able to predict successfully an earthquake. Right.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, interesting. It doesn't stop earthquakes, though. It doesn't help us. We're just like,
I mean, you can maybe know they're coming. I mean, I'll tell you the first predicted earthquake. Still more than 2,000 people died, so it wasn't very helpful.
Well, you know what? It could have been 3,000. You know, you gotta think positive.
There you go. And March 4th, 1975, Charlie Chaplin is knighted.
And he's still at that point. I don't think he's ever allowed to come back to the States.
Yes, I believe that is during his exile.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he never came back. So everything post 50 or something is his exile. He was just out in Europe making babies.
And you want to hear some notable births during Kolchak?
Oh yes, please.
Jimmy Fallon, Nelly.
Sure. How okay.
Leonardo DiCaprio.
Oh yeah, he's always older than I assume. I think because of his face.
Sarah Paulson.
Sarah Paulson.
Bradley Cooper.
See, does Bradley Cooper and Leonardo DiCaprio seem the same age? Maybe if I actually saw them together.
What about this next person? Drew Barrymore.
See, there you go. That's weird. Drew Barrymore seems like she's younger than me.
Here's another one for you. Jolene Balak, who played T'Pol on Enterprise.
Yeah. The sexy Vulcan who they always made have emotions.
And then I think this is half of I give her the name of the band now. Well, this is going well. Will.i.am and Fergie.
Oh yeah, from the Black Eyed
Peas.
Yeah.
They're like a week apart.
Look at that. They must
have fun birthdays together.
They probably do. They probably have a lot of parties together, and then they force everyone to listen to their music at the party.
And there's one notable death for you, Jordan.
Oh, great. Who was it?
Ed Sullivan.
Oh, Ed Sullivan. Interesting. He died in the 70s, huh?
No, that's what Wikipedia told me.
Huh. I mean, it makes as much sense as anything.
And finally, we have watched two other things for the podcast during Kolchak. One was a series, one was a TV movie. Do you think you can make a guess?
Gemini Man is the series?
Nope.
Oof.
Want to do the TV movie?
I don't know. The Astronaut.
No, wrong on both counts.
Yeah, what were they?
The TV series was Planet of the Apes.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Which premiered the day before Kolchak.
What a weird time on TV, huh?
Absolutely. And then the TV movie we watched was Search for the Gods.
Oh, Search for the Gods. I forgot about it. That wasn't bad. Was that Kurt Russell? Was that who that was?
It was a young Kurt Russell.
That's right. Yeah. I've said this before, but this was a really interesting age of television. I know people talk about like the golden age of television as maybe right now or, 10 years ago, whatever. But what a weird time in the 70s where you could have such disparate shows on the air. It's just like they were like, let's just try anything. Like anyone making these executive decisions had no like idea other than let's just try it. Maybe it'll work.
Yeah. It's very funny. When I realized Planet of the Apes was the same time as Kolchak, and like you watch one on Friday and the other on Saturday. I was just like, very different shows in a lot of ways.
Not only very different shows, but different styles, different tones. Like you wouldn't be that surprised if you had said they aired 10 years apart, right? Because they're just so drastically different. So I don't know. It's just a really interesting time for TV. So it's too bad that Ed Sullivan died and didn't get to appreciate it.
He did not get to appreciate any of it. All right, here's the IMDb summary for episode 1, The Ripper. Carl may be up against the original Jack the Ripper, a black-caped, bullet-resistant, superhuman killer of women.
Yeah, I think that's all. It doesn't give you anything other than the basic premise, but I think that's pretty much it.
Get you in there. I'll tell you one thing, Jordan. When this started, because I watch TV movies, but there's obviously no opening credit sequence on a TV movie. This TV series' opening credits is something to behold.
I don't know how you actually felt about it, if you liked it or not. I really liked it because what you get is right off the bat, you get Kolchak walking in his office. He's making a cup of coffee and he's whistling. And
it's a really upbeat song he's whistling.
Yeah, he's just like whistling, and then the whistling.
It's like you're about to watch Mary Tyler Moore.
That's right. And you're like, what is this show? And then they do a turn where the whistling blends and turns into the actual theme, which is a lot. It's still kind of upbeat, but it's a little bit spookier. And then
it just keeps getting darker and more oppressive, the music.
And then you get a lot of him like typing, and it's that sort of stuff. But what I like is at the very end is just a shot of him turning very quickly and then fading out of his face. And it makes me laugh the last 2 episodes.
I mean, it's a great thing because that's it. He sits down and starts typing. The upbeat music starts getting like progressively darker, and as it does, like the actual lighting in the scene, which is his like the newspaper office, they start like dimming the lighting until all the background just falls away, and he's just in a pitch black void typing as hard as he can, and then that's it. It just like cuts to him like as if there's a sound over his shoulder, and I'm like, this is the craziest opening sequence to the show.
I quite liked it. I don't think I've ever seen anything done in quite that style, so I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it had a very nice style to it. But the episode opens up with, as I think all these episodes will, Kolchak is kind of narrating the story he's writing, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And as it starts off, he's talking about how there's a murder has happened at the Werner's Boom Boom Room in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's like a dance club.
Yeah, there's like go-go dancers there. And I really enjoyed this because basically a go-go dancer gets off the stage, and then Jack the Ripper just walks into the dressing room, murders her, steps out, and the bartender's like, what the fuck did you just do? And literally the bartender and every patron in the entire club goes after Jack the Ripper, and he just beats them all back and makes his way to the door.
You know, it's funny. There was a couple things about it that I liked. One, I liked the way they kept the Ripper in this scene and in subsequent scenes always unseen and in the dark. Mm-hmm. So no matter what the scene is, he's hard to kind of pinpoint. And I thought the way they directed it and the way they blocked it really worked for that. And I also like that they set up right out at the bat that he has this supernatural power, because you right off the bat, you know, like there's 20 people that tried fighting him and he pushes them off without much problem. So you're like, oh, this is going to be quite the adversary. It's
not as well done by any means, but I was just like, this is kind of like the scene in Oldboy when he just fights like 17 guys in a hallway. He just steps out and there's just like a million people, and they're like, they come after him, and the Ripper just like punches his way slowly, because it's not like he's overwhelming them exactly, but he's always has the upper hand. He's just like fights his way across the bar and then out the door.
Yeah, the sense I got through all these fights, because there's going to be a few of these, is that this is more of a nuisance for him. People are just in his way.
Yeah, he doesn't mind murdering a woman in front of a million people because he'll just punch his way out.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, of course, 3 days later, the Ripper kills another woman after leaping off the top of a fire escape.
Yeah, he kills her with a sword. I think the first one he just bopped her on the head, but this one he kills her with a sword. But yeah, another thing I have to say that I liked is there's a couple scenes, and this is the first one, of him jumping off buildings, and I know it's some wire work. Again, I thought very well done.
That looks good. Like, it's very effective. Like, he leaps off the top of a building, lands. That sword comes out of his cane. He pulls the sword out of his cane, and then he goes after this woman. My favorite part, though, is Kolchak's narration at this point is he's talking about this woman who's about to die, and he says, Debbie wanted to be successful. She should have settled for being alive.
When he's right, he's right.
I will give it this. There's a lot of voiceover in this, but it has there's a certain level of good writing involved in the voiceover work. Like, it is kind of hard-boiled and fun, and like it's never necessary, but it's also never kind of irritating.
We watched a show previously to this, which is Super Train. Similar time period, roughly. And there was an episode, remember they did an episode that was sort of kind of do this like voiceover,
Superstar with the director of Adam Sandler's films.
And it couldn't have fallen flatter, right? It just didn't work at all. And on this, on paper, this is the exact same thing, and this just works better. And what it is it's just written better.
The dialogue is significantly better. Like, that's one of the things I think that sparkles on this show is I'm just like, the dialogue on this show just kind of works.
Yeah.
I mean, it probably also helps that Darren McGavin.
Yeah, Darren McGavin, who plays Kolchak, he's really, really good. And not only is he's really watchable. He just is one of those people you're like, it's that, we've talked about it a bunch of times where TV shows, and especially of this era, have a tendency to give you a lead, sometimes just like a handsome white guy who you're just supposed to like just because. And it doesn't always work that well because the writing doesn't back it up. On this show, at least for me, as soon as he walked on the screen and started, first couple lines, I was like, oh, I like him. I like Kolchak.
He is doing an amazing job. Like, he's chewing scenery. He's extremely watchable. Like, it's a big part of the draw of the show. I think I'm just like, every line he delivers is just full of this like weird energy that he brings.
And you know who the character is right away. Like, you don't have to do much. Everything is working for him. It's his hat, it's his mannerisms, it's the dialogue. It just works.
Yeah. I mean, you can see why they did 2 TV movies about him, and where it's like, let's just keep going. Like, this actor can just like bring this character to life in a half a second.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, this brings the Ripper to Chicago, where he kills a third victim. This time, a woman carrying a very large teddy bear down the street. And not only does she get murdered, but the teddy bear is decapitated as well.
Yeah, I think it was just a way for them to be able to show the violence without really showing the violence.
It's true. It was effective. It was a fun sequence where they cut and the teddy bear's head falls on the ground. You're like, oh no.
Yeah. And then we go to, which is going to be one of your major sets for the show, which was in the opening, which is the one room is like the newsroom. And they're called INS, right? Independent News Service.
That's them. That's the newspaper.
And what you get is, I think Vincenzo, his office is sort of off the main room, and you go in there sometimes, but the main area is sort of just like your classic newsroom, and right in the middle is the desk where Kolchak sits. And I think the next scene is when Vincenzo gives him sort of like busy work.
Yeah, well, he gets in trouble because I think, as is usual for old Kolchak, is he's pissed off the local officials by impersonating a police officer this time.
Yeah, you get the sense it doesn't bother him to bend the rules to get the story he wants. Although I'm going to say, this is something we can talk about maybe at the end of this, does he ever get to actually publish these wild stories? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if it's ever worth it, because I'm like, where's this actually showing up?
It is a good question. This time when he gets in trouble for impersonating a police officer, his punishment is to take over, I guess the writer of the Dear Emily advice column is on vacation. So he's now put in charge of answering all the letters that come into the advice column.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of comedy where, you're like, oh no, how many letters there are going to be? And it's sort of like that scene from Miracle on 34th Street. Like, there's just so many letters that get poured on his desk that you just know the whole point of this is to just keep him busy so he's out of trouble.
Yeah, this is this little side project for him to do. But on his way home that day from work, because he has a police scanner in his car, he picks up the call about a murdered woman and the homicide suspect being chased by the police. So Kolchak just pulls up to the scene of the police chase, and it is like insane. Like, the Ripper is running from rooftop to rooftop. Police are chasing him. The police are just firing hundreds of bullets.
Well, that's what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be they're going to shoot him and he disappears, or they shoot him and they find the body and he's dead and he comes back again. But it's not. It's just like, it doesn't bother him. He gets shot like 50 times.
He's up 50 times. He's fighting police on these, like, you're looking at it from the street level, so you're just seeing this like fight on a rooftop. And then at some point, the Ripper just leaps off the roof into another pile of cops, picks one up WWE style, and smashes him into the windshield of a car. And then he like does a flying flip over Kolchak and runs off.
And Kolchak, it's something I've noticed in both episodes, and I don't know if they're in the TV movies, but he has this cool little little camera. I don't know if I've ever seen this like style of camera before. It's very like almost very flat and long. Anyways, I guess it's like whatever the hip portable camera was in 1975. But he's there just trying to get photos all the time. It's a lot of things where he'll take photos and then eventually his camera gets smashed. I think in both episodes his camera gets smashed at some point.
A lot of his stuff gets smashed, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, Kolchak's like, whoa, this is a crazy story, and he's gonna go write it up for Vincenzo, but turns out Vincenzo's already assigned another reporter to this story, and he has to keep working on the Dear Emily's.
He has Ron Updike.
Ron Updike. I hope this character sticks around, because I like him because Kolchak calls him, hey, Uptight, what's up?
Yeah, I love it. And it's one of those where, like, you get that there's some sort of somewhat friendly rivalry that, Updike is the very proper, do things by the book, straight-laced. He's
a real weak-kneed fop.
Yeah, that's right. And it plays them off each other, and so he always calls him Uptight, and he's like, don't call me Uptight! And it's like, oh, I get this dynamic right away.
It's like a real WKRP relationship or something.
Yeah, that's
like,
right.
This would be a sitcom in this office otherwise.
Yeah. So Vincenzo gives Updike the story about this murder instead of Kolchak, which I don't know if that's the best. I mean, he must know Updike, but it's like he's clearly doesn't care that much about the story.
Yeah, well, and obviously Kolchak's going to keep on the story anyway, because what kind of show would this be if he doesn't? He ends up going to a police press conference where he learns via another reporter, Jane Plum, that she received a letter from the Ripper that had details the police never released to the public, including a poem that said, "And now a pretty girl will die, so Jack can have his kidney pie." And this revelation is that the Ripper has been cutting out the kidneys of the people he murders.
And we're gonna have spent a few scenes with this Jane Plum. And Luke, what is the one thing or the one way people describe Jane Plum in this episode?
I will say this, the one thing that I was like a little difficult in these is there's a real distaste for women on this show.
It's a weird thing that comes out on this show, which is Jane Plum is she's a lady. She's a normal looking lady.
I know, that was crazy. Like, the whole intro to her is a monologue, a VO by Kolchak describing just how overweight she is. And then they cut to her and she's just like a normal lady. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, and they like refer to her as fat over and over and over. And it's sort of like some sort of gag that maybe worked then, but maybe didn't. I don't know. It falls flat, and it's a bit of a shame on this show. You're just like, guys, you don't need to do this.
It is too bad too, because they can almost stick the landing because the whole narration that Kolchak's giving you is kind of derogatory to this poor woman, but also acknowledging he's like, but we're colleagues and like we both trust each other and like so she'll tell me what's really going on. And then you cut to her and she's like, Kolchak, I don't trust you at all. What are you talking about? And I think there's like the problem is they're trying to like establish like a fun rapport between them. But they've put such a taint to it and his like physical description of her that like it kind of ruins the fun rapport, which could have been rival reporters.
I agree. Yeah.
But it's just, it is. She is great, though. The actress playing Jane Plum, I could have had her as a series regular, too. She was very funny and very interesting. And, like, her and Kolchak had actually a great dynamic when the characters were actually in a scene
thought
together.
So, too. I thought, she's not in the second episode, but I thought it was going to be the same thing. I thought it was building the world a little bit. You're going to meet these other characters. And I was like, oh, this is great. She's like a kind of a version of him for some other paper, but that's not really what they want.
Yeah, it is too bad because it is that thing where it's just like they taint the introduction, and then when you see them together, I'm like, oh, these two have great chemistry together, and this is like a fun scene of two just like reporters trying to dig up a story. Like the whole thing is she's telling him about the kidney thing, and she's just apparently the paper she works at is far more sensationalist, and perhaps where Kolchak should be working. But she's just like, Kolchak, listen, I'll tell you what happened there, but you got to like help me come up with like a great angle for me to pitch this next story to. So she tells him about the kidneys and how it's very similar to the original Ripper, and then Kolchak's just like, all right, how about this for your headline? Cannibalism. And it cuts back to Jane Plum, and she's just like, yes, that is amazing. Cannibalism.
Yeah, I didn't quite get how that was a fair trade, but she feels like it is. So if she was happy with it.
Yeah, it wasn't really a fair trade at all, but it was a fun sequence between the two of them where I was really digging those two characters together.
Oh, and I just wanted to mention a couple quick things that we didn't mention. Kolchak always wears a straw hat. I don't know if we said that. That's kind of his character's look, which I liked. And he also drives a really cool yellow Ford Mustang convertible. I just thought it was just a weird thing, and I enjoyed that.
He's got a great costume. Like you would never mistake Kolchak. If you saw Kolchak, someone dressed up for Halloween, you'd know exactly who he was.
Yeah.
Those tennis shoes, that straw hat, like his little like rumpled suit.
Hey, do you want to go? We'll go to a Halloween party, Luke. You can be Kolchak, and I'll be Updike.
Sure. Or I could be Vincenzo. You could be.
Either way, or I'll be Jane Plum, whatever.
Yeah, I'll be Vincenzo. You be Jane Plum. Everyone will know exactly who we are.
We've just ruined the whole idea. The whole idea is everyone only knows Kolchak, not these other characters.
Anyway, the Ripper is going to strike again now. This time this was interesting to me. A piece of trivia I had no idea. In the Loop, which is Chicago's Times Square, apparently. Mm-hmm. Which I think at this time Times Square was very seedy and touristy, which I think is the case here as well, because he's going to strike at this massage parlor.
Yeah.
And after he kills a woman at the massage parlor, Updike happens to beat Kolchak to the scene, and he gets allowed in to like view the crime scene to write about it. And when Kolchak arrives, since the police don't really like him, they won't let Kolchak in because there's already an INS reporter inside. So Kolchak instead ends up noticing a nearby fender bender. A car has had a little bit of an accident, and when he wanders over, the person explains that his car hit Jack the Ripper as he ran away, and Jack the Ripper was fine, and the front of this car is just like destroyed.
Yeah, again, they're just sort of seeding how powerful this person is.
Yes. And Kolchak's at the same time, he's been hearing about this. He's been looking into kind of Jack the Ripper copycats throughout history, and it's always 5 women. It's always sort of they fall into a certain socioeconomic area, and he's just like, hey, it seems to me that every time a new copycat Ripper is caught, he's either executed or, as in New York one time, he like breaks free the police and escapes. And basically, he starts to suspect that there's no copycats. It's always the same Jack the Ripper throughout time causing these crimes.
Yeah, and so this will conflict with the other theory, which is, I think in the next scene or two, he goes to dinner with Jane again, and they talk, and she also thinks it's, a Ripper type character, but she thinks it's what she calls contagious psychosis, which is a psychiatric syndrome in which symptoms of a delusional belief and sometimes hallucinations are transmitted from one individual to another. So basically, she thinks that over time, it's not that the Ripper is, remanifesting or reincarnating. It's that people have been, there's something in the social osmosis that is making people, think they are part of this, and thus they are the Ripper in that way. That's a really terrible way of explaining it, but that's basically her theory.
Yeah, exactly. I did like this, though, because they discussed one time the Ripper was caught and he was hung by the neck in Germany. And Kolchak's just like, I never got a good photo of him, but I think one of my photos might have shown some rope burn on his neck, maybe. I don't know. It's hard to see.
Right. And we also learned there, I think it's here where they say that every time a Ripper or the Ripper appears, 5 women are killed, right?
Yes.
And so far, 3 women have been killed. So Kolchak's theory is that he has 2 more, and they have to catch him before 2 more women are killed. Is that correct? I heard that same thing, but I was writing up my notes here. I was doing the math on that, and I was just like, boom, boom, room in Wisconsin, second woman in Wisconsin. Then he kills the woman with the teddy bear. That's 3. And then he kills the woman in the massage parlor. That's 4 at this point. So I think there's some confusion in the movie, the show itself. Right.
Because I realized I was writing my notes. I'm like, no, 4 are dead, and there's only 1 more to go.
And I'm going to also assume he at least killed at least 1 police officer. He doesn't count any of those?
Those don't count. Cops don't count.
Collateral damage. He's like that. I only count the ones I really want.
But yes, the idea is that there's more victims to come, and that in the original Jack the Ripper case, after the last murder, the Ripper would go back to the same location, kill someone again at that spot. So this is basically Kolchak's like, I've got an idea. I'm going to go back to the massage parlor, and I'm going to see if I can catch the Ripper myself. And I like it. He goes to the massage parlor and he orders a number 7.
Yeah.
Did you see what the sign was? The number 7
what's funny?
was?
I tried seeing it, but I couldn't quite read the sign of what the options were. What was the number 7?
I went frame by frame so I could get it.
Good for you.
He ordered a hot oil, vibrator, and towel.
Yeah, okay.
Probably a nice massage.
Probably. This maybe I'm naive. Is this place like on the up and up? Because the ladies are dressed sort of seductively is not the word, but they're in like little outfits.
I mean, this is more of a sex work style massage parlor, I think.
That's why I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if it was just a 70s thing or this was the impression was supposed to be that like, untoward things are happening.
I think the idea is because that's what happened with Jack the Ripper originally. I think these are all supposed to be sex workers. I mean, it's hard to tell. Some of them seem like they might. Some of them they imply heavily that she's killed. Although there's one woman I believe the woman he said who should have settled for being alive. When I saw her, she was leaving a business called Miss Physiotherapy. And I'm just like, I don't know what that means.
Either way, it's like it's a massage parlor. He goes in, and you get a bit of a light comedy kind of scene where he's trying to let the lady know that he doesn't really want a massage. What he wants is to sort of hide out and watch to see if any scary people come out of the rapper.
Can I watch? Can I hide and watch your next client with my camera?
And she thinks he's being a real creep because he's being some sort of voyeur. And what ends up happening is through this sort of like them both talking and thinking the other one means the other thing, she reveals that she's an undercover cop and arrests him.
Yeah. Well, they know who Kolchak is, so they're immediately just like, listen, Kolchak, you're under arrest for being a pervert.
Yeah, and he does get arrested.
Yeah, it's great. Another cop comes in, they put him in handcuffs, they toss him in the back of a cop car, and as they're doing that, the Ripper does show up at the massage parlor. He goes in, and before he can kill anyone, the cops spring out to try to get him. But of course, since he's like this like superhuman punch machine, he punches his way out of the massage parlor, and all the cops chase him again. It's another rooftop chase. Because Kolchak's in the back of one of these squad cars, he gets to go along for the ride. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of very similar. Like, it's a chase. They're shooting this Ripper. He can't be killed. And then the Ripper like tries to jump over an electric fence. And that's the thing that kind of like knocks the wind out of his sails and they're able to catch him.
Yeah, and it was shot in a weird way that I didn't realize he had actually been caught, because you don't see him get grabbed, and the reason you don't see him get grabbed, so you can actually see his face or whatever at this point. But yes, he's now in. They're both essentially in jail.
Yes. Well, this is where Vincenzo comes down to the station to bail Kolchak out as usual. And of course, Kolchak is like, I love it. He's just like, Kolchak's like, sounds like an insane human being. He's like railing against the captain about ignoring like all the signs pointing toward this Ripper being like some supernatural. He's just like, did you not see him jump off the roof? What do you mean?
Yeah, it's his very much Mulder from the X-Files kind of scene. That's the character. You know, he's like, can't you see that what's in front of your eyes? It's this incredibly fantastical thing.
Yeah, and the captain's like, nah, it's fine. He's totally fine. We've got him locked up in maximum security cell. He's not going anywhere. Cut to Jack the Ripper literally ripping a steel door out of a wall.
I actually think he punches it out is what he does. He hits it because the door goes outwards. So I think he hits it so many times that he... But what is funny, they've put him into like sort of a classic jail door, like it's a steel door and it has got a little window with bars on it, but he hits it so many times that it's not the door that comes out, it's the actual stone around the door gets knocked off. So it's like, wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, it definitely it's for a show that's like clearly not like a high budget show. I mean, it's not low budget either. Like it's a pretty decent budget, but like they don't have the effects we have today. They really sell the idea that like knocking this door out is a Herculean task.
Yeah. It's like something like the Incredible Hulk would do or something.
Exactly. Kolchak's bailed out, and now he's trying to get a hold of the reporter Jane Plum, because she had in her article she had put out a call to the Ripper to get a hold of her, and she'd do an interview with him. And he knows she's been like setting up interviews with just like any unbalanced human being claiming to be the Ripper, so he's a little worried about her.
Yeah.
No one knows where she is, so he calls her mother, and her mother happens to mention she went to a meeting in Wilton Park. And this triggers a memory for Kolchak. Back at the beginning of the episode when he was reading those Dear Emily letters, a woman had written in from Wilton Park complaining about her well-dressed neighbor in a cape who was really creepy and seemed to have X-ray eyes that would make her sterile.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where it's very convenient that he had also read these letters, but I was like, well, you know what? They tied it all together pretty well that, you know, that it's at least they thread that he was reading these letters. But yes, he goes to see this lady who may have been made sterile by this guy's eyes.
Yeah. She says an old woman in his house, and she's like, oh yeah, the house, the Ripper's house is just over there. And so Kolchak is able to head over to the Ripper's house, which is, Jordan, I don't know if you saw this trivia, is the Munster's house.
I didn't see that.
Yeah. The Ripper lives in the Munster's house. Apparently.
Oh, that's funny. It was just sitting on a lot, huh?
And what happens when he gets to this house is a very long, borderline incoherent sequence.
It's funny because there's also another scene which I thought was weirdly unnecessary, which is they have him go to the hardware store to pick up supplies.
Well, that's just it.
And I was just like, just to have in his car.
He goes to the Munster's house. He wanders around like throwing rocks at the windows to see if he can get any reaction. Is anyone inside? He doesn't. He then walks along the porch and his like foot goes through, like he does like a slapstick comedy sequences where his foot goes through boards in the porch and he's like falling all over the place. He works his way back, and at this point we know like it seems like the Ripper is afraid of electricity or worried about it. He finds the electrical box to this house, and I'm just like, oh, so I assumed it meant there's no electricity, but it's not what it means at all. He just means there is electricity at the house. So Kolchak gets in his car, drives to an all-night electrical supply store, buys a whole bunch of like wiring and like the electrical gloves. Like he buys like all the stuff to do like an electrician work. Hours must pass where he's doing this electrician work on this electrical box. I'm just like, what is he running these cables for? I assumed he was running power to the house, but we'll later find out he's actually running power out of the house.
Yeah.
Once he's
setting up a trap is what he's doing.
Incoherently setting up a trap. Once he does all this electrical work, which for me like must have taken hours, he then goes inside the house finally to look around, which there's actually a great sequence where he walks upstairs and there's like a kettle whistling and it's like this really unnerving noise inside. Mm-hmm. He finds the kettle. The Ripper comes home from, I have no idea where he was. The Ripper was just out, apparently. He left the kettle on when he went out.
Well, it is funny because I thought the same thing, because you would assume the Ripper would only really leave to go do murders, but I guess he also needs to get milk. So he was just out.
Yeah. he was just out and about. And Kolchak's like, oh no, I better hide. And there's like a closet in the Ripper's room that he's in, and it's just got like a curtain over top of it, basically. So he goes and hides in the closet because there's nowhere else to hide. He's freaking out. He hides in the closet. And the Ripper comes in, and it's very funny because the Ripper's just like, better hang up my hat. He goes to the closet, And the Ripper then proceeds to hang up his entire, like, his hat, his cloak, everything he's wearing, but completely blindly. He never opens the closet. He just puts his hand in, gropes around to find a hanger, hangs up. So you can get these sequences of, like, Kolchak hiding and, like, watching a hand come back in front of his face.
Yeah.
And the thing that made me laugh the hardest is he never opens this closet. Kolchak is never in danger of getting caught, but apparently it's so tense. It's so tense watching this man's hand grope around this closet. Kolchak just screams apropos of, like, just gives himself away, falls out of the closet, runs out of the room, falls off the second floor banister because it's so rickety. He just falls down a floor.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give them this. I think the whole point of him, it was done as like a kind of broad comedy of him falling through the porch, the rickety porch. I think they were trying to establish that this house is not terribly livable, like it's falling apart.
Yeah,
but it is a kind of funny scene because when he runs away from the Ripper, who I should say, we do get a look at his face at this point. He's like he looks like a young bearded man. He looks like he's like Chris Christopherson or something.
Here was the trivia for that I saw on IMDb. Apparently that the facial, that the look of him is the exact description of the original Jack the Ripper from like police reports at the time. So they like just found a guy and like gave him the same like facial hair.
Right.
That was their pull. They're like, right. Oh, he is the original.
Right. Anyways,
you would never know.
He just looked like a handsome bearded gentleman.
He looked very handsome.
Yeah. So he Kolchak's running over the stairs and does this like pratfall over the banister. What I like though is he breaks through the banister and hits the ground, and it doesn't seem to bother him either. I'm like, maybe in this world people could just jump off ledges and stuff and it doesn't
he really takes that fall very, very gracefully. And it is just like, and it's not bad necessarily, but it is kind of this weird slapstick. Like he tries to get to the front of the door, but the doorknob falls off. He runs over, trips over a couch.
I think what it is it's the last act of the show, and I think they need to just up the energy. And so this is their way of doing it. Is there's running and like it doesn't quite make sense, but I think they just want to. You've been waiting so long for something to happen. It's like now we're just gonna do a bunch of zany stuff. Just it's entertaining.
Well, he falls over a couch, and whose body's on the couch but Jane Plum? She's dead.
Yeah,
and you're like, oh,
what a bummer.
Jane. And then
she didn't even get a death scene. You know, she didn't even get to die.
It's true. I know you never see her die. And then one of my favorite parts from that original Supertrain episode that we were talking about with the narration, Kolchak then just leaps through a window.
Yeah, that's right.
A real classic way to get out of a building. He just like full body leaps through a window.
You see that a lot in TV. Have you or is anyone you've ever known just gone through a plate glass window? Like I've
never been chased by the Ripper.
Well, that is true. I'm assuming you don't end up looking too good at the end of it. You know?
Yeah, I would assume it's a very bloody attempt.
Yeah, I know it's like sugar glass in TV, but like, come on, guys.
At any rate, this whole thing is for the Ripper to chase Kolchak. He chases him into the forest behind the house. Kolchak runs through a pond, and when he gets to the other side, the Ripper steps in the pond. And this is what Kolchak had been doing with all that electrical cable: is he was running a live electrical line to this pond, and then when the Ripper gets in, he tosses it into the pool, and the Ripper just gets fried. Apparently,
yeah. So he like Kevin McAllister Home Alone this thing. So what was weird about it is I actually didn't mind that he was like this sort of Jaws 2 end to the way to get rid of the Ripper, because it makes sense. They've
established electricity.
Yeah, they were establishing that electricity was a problem, but none of Kolchak's actions in the house indicated that he was setting the guy up
a plan
to chase
of any sort.
Yeah, that was what was weird. That didn't quite make sense.
That's what I mean. Like that whole sequence where he does all that work is just like it's borderline incoherent because you have no idea what he's doing until the end, and you're like, was I supposed to think he was building a trap somehow?
Because what would have been interesting is he actually built a trap in the house. It doesn't work, and then when he's chasing him through some sort of coincidence or something, he still ends up getting zapped in some way. That's how it should have done. And it almost is like, it's not like they didn't have time for it. Just don't have him go to the hardware store for 10 minutes.
Oh, there was plenty. Yeah, the end both dragged on for no reason. And not that it didn't work at times, but it was just like it went on for a long time and didn't make a lot of sense. You're like, you could have definitely rejigged this, guys.
Yeah, but anyways, so the Ripper gets defeated here. He gets electrocuted, and then we sort of cut to the office, and here he's narrating what happens, and what we find is that the police showed up. They didn't find anything in the pond, so his body is
just clothes. All that's left is clothes. The house burned down,
and I like that Kolchak's getting charged with arson and mischief.
Yes. malicious mischief.
Malicious mischief. That's the worst kind of mischief.
Because the house also burnt down, apparently destroying all the evidence, including Jane Plum's body is gone now.
Which, if you think about it, actually is really, really bad. Like, Kolchak really screwed up.
Yeah, 100%. And like, basically he's just like, well, there's nothing to write about this story because it all ended up that I have no evidence and there's no story anymore. And then it ends with him being like, the only thing left in the building was this 70-year-old shoe that has been out of style for so long that it must mean he was the original Ripper.
Yeah, it's a shoe that stopped being made 70 years ago. So you're like, oh, his clothes also manifest.
Just that one shoe survived,
right? So there you go. But he ends up with him just like, yeah, as you said, like he scrunches up story and he's like, well, no story here. And I was like, what did you do for the week then? What are you giving to Vincenzo at your deadline?
That's Updike's problem, not his.
Like, oh yeah, it's not even his story. I guess you're right.
I believe at some point midway through this, Vincenzo and Updike discuss a story, and Vincenzo's like, "How did you turn this story into from a murder on the loose to like writing a Puritan article about how massage parlors exist?" It was very funny because Vincenzo basically like calls him out for victim blaming. He's like, "Did you just write a story about how it's these women's fault?"
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't quite decided, at least after 2 episodes, which obviously we'll speak about another one now, if he is a really good reporter or he's just an entertaining reporter,
Yeah, I think it might be a little column B, but
yeah.
I'm sure when he turns in a story, based on his narration, they're probably well written. They're very like exaggeratedly written.
But I will say, at the end of this episode, I was surprised at how fresh this show felt. It felt like a obviously it's from the 70s, and as we said, there's some 70s tropes in this, but I think it's aged better than a lot of things from this time period.
We'll get into it later, but I will give it this. I think the one thing this series has, like, the dialogue works, Kolchak is a great character, and the show is just dripping in style. Like, in a way that a lot of these shows don't have any style. This show is just like, is all style all the time.
You're absolutely right. I think that's probably maybe some sort of defining feature.
Yeah. Here is the IMDb summary for episode 2, The Zombie.
Popular folklore would have us believe that there exist in the underworld ruthless men who fear nothing. This story should debunk that myth.
An old Haitian woman uses voodoo to resurrect her dead grandson to kill the mobsters who murdered him, as well as those like Kolchak who would interfere with her revenge.
The first thing I thought when I saw the description for this episode was, this is going to be a little bit dicey. And I know it's like the 1970s. I don't know. The whole thing about voodoo made me feel like, I don't know how they're going to handle this. How did you think overall this was? Like, is that a fair kind of a feeling?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much just like an exotic culture. I mean, here's the thing. I think if you've seen any zombie movies from like the 70s and 80s, you've seen how they're handling zombieism in this. Like, this is not that much different than Weekend at Bernie's, basically. Or right. Weekend at Bernie's 2, where he's a zombie. That's the level of understanding. So, yeah, I mean, I would say culturally, it's definitely just like pulling tropes and using them. I will say the one thing I was a little surprised by that they're like pretty open about talking about, and like not to say that they don't use a lot of stereotypes throughout the episode, is they're really talking about Chicago and the racial divide. They're talking about South Side Chicago and how it's just like...
That's true.
Well, it might not be the most sensitive portrayal. It certainly at least acknowledges racial tensions in Chicago and how the city's divided that way in a way that I'm just like, oh, I'm surprised the show's willing to go there. And like they even are willing to acknowledge it's not like all black people use voodoo. They're very focused on a Haitian community who uses voodoo. Like, it's like a weird walking a line where it's like quite clearly just like using this as a plot point, and like, you know, there's no other black characters. There's like a lot of reasons why this is probably like is not great. Mm-hmm. But also I was also watching and be like, it's could have been worse than it was. Although that was
okay. That was kind of the confirmation maybe I'm looking for. I felt the same way, but I wasn't sure if it was just me. I was like, it wasn't great, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Like, we've seen stuff that's way more makes you feel uncomfortable watching it. This was just one of those where I was like, oh, they're walking a tightrope. I don't know how successful it's being, but it's not that bad.
I will say
that's the warning for everyone. It's not that bad.
It's not that great, but it could be worse, I guess, is the idea.
Yeah.
Although the Italian stereotype gangster really throws around some racial slurs that are I've never heard them before, and they're very weird.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh my God, this is a lot of racial slurs, and also racial slurs I have never heard before.
Yeah, they haven't aged. No one remembers what they mean. But anyways, we open on a warehouse. I actually really like the Foley work here. We get a sound of some shoes walking, and they sound like real nice, expensive leather shoes, you know?
Yeah. They're the low-level bookies who work for the syndicate. They work out of like the back of this container for that goes on the back of
it's like a shipping container. I actually thought it was really cool. What you have is it's a warehouse full of different shipping containers, and they have apparently, I guess, because probably for mobility issues, the mob is running sort of like a low-level accounting kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's like a bookie. It's a numbers racket, so they like take bets, they do that stuff, and this is a great way for them to destroy it quickly if they need to.
So these guys, there's about 3 guys I think in this. There's one guy who seems to be doing most of the work. The other 2 are kind of like hoods. They're kind of just like guys with guns, bodyguard type things. And they hear someone coming, and the place starts shaking, and the door starts going. And what I like is the first thing they do is they start shredding all the receipts that they have, but they're really tiny little receipts, and it made me laugh because they're sticking all these little tiny receipts in the shredder, and then the door breaks open. And what's interesting is their first response is they just start firing, but they don't know what's open in the door.
They know somebody's smashing that door open. They don't want to be caught with all these betting receipts.
But it did seem to be the appropriate response, though, because they get attacked right away by, again, similar to the first episode, sort of an unseen attacker. They shoot it in a way where you can't quite tell what's happening. You just know that this is a large figure. It's a very powerful figure. And I think they give the impression that they're sort of like almost broken in half. Like this person just shatters their body.
Well, that'll become the like running thing. It's like one of these hoods gets his back broken by this assailant, and Kolchak is left to write up the story about this dead former boxer who worked for the syndicate who was killed over at the old INS newspaper. And while he's doing that, we get to meet their new intern, Monique Marmelstein.
And she's another, unfortunately for this show, there's been 2, I'm going to say major female characters. They're not really, they're more sort of the only
one-offs, but yes, they got more screen time.
And if the show has a real slight against it, and there's a few, one would be the writing of the female characters. They're written to be annoyances and obstacles in the way for your cool character to just get what he needs to get done.
And I will say, the funny part is, too, because they're written that way, and then when you watch the scenes with them, I was just like, I'm actually kind of want to spend more time with, like, when she's handing out the mail at the office, and she just, like, throws the mail down the desk. So I'm like, yeah, fuck this job. I get you.
So, yeah, so she is, you probably caught it, but her dad, I think, is somewhat important. So she's sort of one of the, like an intern that's kind of thrust upon you because of who her dad is. Yeah,
she's the niece of the owner of INS. Right. So she's there because she went to school for journalism. He wanted to put her somewhere, and Vincenzo really wants to pair her with Kolchak to show her the ropes. As she says, she's just like, listen, I know all the scuttlebutt, what people are saying about me around the office, but she swears her getting this job is not nepotism.
Oh, did she say nepotism? Oh, did she? I didn't even catch that.
She keeps calling it nepotism, and Kolchak's like, do you mean nepotism? And she's like, huh?
It definitely is nepotism. I'm not saying she hasn't worked for anything, but the only reason she's there is because of her uncle. Like, come on.
Yeah. And anyway, Kolchak's convinced to take her on an assignment when he's basically Vincenzo offers like him an exclusive to take her out in the field, and that exclusive is a police raid of a syndicate-affiliated apple farm and cider works.
Wasn't that odd? What an odd thing, huh?
It was very funny.
I know, because they're like, we're gonna go out to this farm. I was like, why? And there isn't any real reason. Like, we're gonna see stuff in a barn or something, but there is no reason other than it's just different. It's just different to go to a farm.
They needed a place to do a big shootout, so this was available.
But I have to say, pretty good. So far in 2 episodes, we've seen the Ripper was at an old creepy house. There was also a fight at like a construction site in an alley, and now we're getting like a farm, and we also saw this weird warehouse. Like, there, to your point earlier, this show doesn't seem like it's lacking in a budget, or if it is, you can't tell by the variety of the locations that they're using.
Well, I'll say this too, and I think this relates back to the TV movies, is because the first one was in Las Vegas, and I thought it was really, the location played a big part of the movie because, while it's in Las Vegas, very little of it takes place on the Strip. It's out in like the boonies of Vegas, and they're driving around the streets of Vegas. So like they really use the city to the most effect. And then the sequel that was in San Francisco, the climax of it takes place in a thing I didn't know existed, but apparently at some point San Francisco rebuilt on top of old San Francisco. So underground is a whole other San Francisco.
Oh.
And I don't know how much, like, apparently you can do tours of them, like, this exists, and I don't know how much of the show, like, utilize the actual existing places, but a large portion of the climax of the second movie is in this huge underground multi-story San Francisco that was buried under modern San Francisco. So, like, this show is, like, has a really great sense of, like, using a location or at least trying to find, like, interesting places to go to for these sequences. And yeah, I agree. I'm like, they went to this weird Ciderworks. I'm like, what's happening here? But it's like, it's kind of like, it's just different and it's nice. You're in a different new location.
You just think of some of these shows we've seen this time period where it just seems like at a certain point you're like, are you guys at the same roadside stop? Like, it's like you just don't get that feeling in this show. Like, you get a sense of the world very quickly.
Yeah, it feels like you're somewhere. It feels like you're in a location for sure. They arrive at this. So Kolchak and Monique pull up to this farm just as the shootout breaks up between the cops and the Russo brothers inside, which I thought was great. They pull up and Monique turns out to be like absolutely fearless. She hops out of the car with her camera and she's just like she's like Kolchak. She's grabbing shots. Bullets are flying everywhere. The cops are screaming to get her out of there, kind of thing. And then Kolchak like calls her over and he's like, get in the trunk of my car and I'll drive us closer so you can get better shots. And then he just locks her in the trunk of the car, and then she's just gone for the next 20 minutes.
It was a weird thing because they introduced the character as a hindrance for him or as an annoyance, which is like, sure, but then they just get her out of it. And it's like, well, why even have her then?
Well, that's
because
the thing. She'll be locked in that trunk. We won't see her for a while. At some point, Kolchak will get a call and get in trouble for doing that. Mm-hmm. And then near the end of the episode, she gets sent back out with him. And then she just like sees a dead body and it's not even like she like panics. She just freezes for a second seeing her first dead body. Kolchak puts her in a cab and sends her to Brooklyn. And that's the last we see of that character.
Yeah, it was a weird thing to add because I thought at first what we were going to do is they were going to be introducing if not a series regular, someone that's going to show up throughout the show. And maybe she still will. But it was like, it was entirely unnecessary because they didn't do anything with it. It was like either have her be that partner and have that thing we've seen a million times, but we've seen it a million times because it works, which is two partners who are opposite. You know, he's old, she's young, he's experienced, she's not. But they're
both jerks.
They're both jerks, but they just or you know they learn they have more in common than they thought originally. It's like, again, we've seen it before, but they just don't want to do anything with it. It's really surprising.
It was a huge misstep for me in this episode because when I saw it, I'm just like, you know what is actually a great idea is to partner him with this young upstart who is like a little nepotism and like they don't get along because obviously Kolchak would always hold that against her. And it would have been a really great way to get insight into Kolchak's character, to give him a little arc in this episode. And they set it up right off the top. They're like, here you go. This is an easy episode to write of the two of them running around. She wouldn't be that much of a hindrance because she just like she doesn't need to be a major character. She just needs to be there either getting into trouble or getting Kolchak out of trouble. But they don't use her. Like, that's the thing. In the trunk and then in a cab 40 minutes later and she's out of the episode. I'm just like, why did you put her in this at all?
Yeah. I thought it was kind of surprising for a show that I think executes most things quite well. It was surprising how just not well executed that was.
As I was writing about my notes, I was like, this is such a botched concept because it was just like the show. I actually think the episode would have been better if she had been with him the whole time.
I agree.
I think you would have had a better episode.
Yeah,
not that
I
it's
agree.
necessarily a terrible episode, but it just would have been way more interesting.
Yeah. So anyways, they have a firing. We find the press shows up at a certain point after the shoot up and the cops. You get a real sense in this episode. The cops you're not supposed to be terribly supportive of them. They might be.
This show's anti-cop.
Yeah, so the cops are being cagey at best about giving information.
They won't show anybody the bodies of because the Russo brothers are killed in the shootout. The cops won't show the bodies, and Kolchak has to go visit Gordy the Ghoul Spangler at the morgue.
Yeah, again, the show does a great job of like making this world bigger and having these new characters. And you're like, so this is a guy like his informant essentially, or his guy on the inside who works at the morgue, who basically will give him information for cash. And it's a funny scene because every time he wants more information, the guy's like, give me cash, and he has to keep giving him more and more cash. And I just was like, I like it. I like that character.
Well, and it's fun too because they establish even more to his character in that the idea is like he's not taking straight bribes. What he does is he runs a lottery out of the morgue, in which place where you can bet on the birthdays of the people who are coming into the morgue that week. That's how he like kind of like it. So it's not a straight bribe. He kind of runs this like his own little numbers game out of the morgue. So Kolchak's always like, he's like, and what dates do you want? And Kolchak doesn't care. He's just like, I don't just tell me, here's the money. And Kolchak's constantly having to like point at a calendar to pick days.
I thought it was, again, an interesting thing, and they give more to this character than they do to her old, I can't remember her name now. It's Monique Marmelstein.
It is. That's what's so funny. It's like there are these sequences, but anyway, Gordy is a fun character. He basically fills in Kolchak that he doesn't know much about the Russo brothers who were killed because the police are keeping it under wraps. But what he does know is that Boxer, who we saw at the beginning, had his back snapped, and then he was related to the Syndicate. And that when they raided the Syndicate farm after they killed them, they found like 20 or 30 bodies on the premises. So the Syndicate was clearly killing people and burying them there. But one of the bodies they found was from a black numbers runner from the South Side named Francis Edmonds. And what's weird about that is Francis Edmonds had actually been killed by the Syndicate last week. And like Gordy had already seen him. He'd already come through the morgue. They'd already done an autopsy on him. And it was just so weird that the body came back a week later, having been found on this farm. He had chicken blood in his ears. And it was just kind of like, what is the Syndicate up to? Why would they dig up this guy they killed last week and then bring him here? And like Gordy has some like theories, because he's also a numbers runner. He's just like, sometimes when you get caught by the cops, you have to eat all your betting slips to hide them. So maybe they dug up his body to try to get the betting slips out of his stomach or something. Like they're throwing all these theories around as to why the body would be at the farm. But since it's an episode called The Zombie, we know why he's there.
But it is really, it's setting up what this episode is going to be. This is the mystery. How is this guy who was already dead shown up dead again? Is basically what it is.
Yes, exactly. And Kolchak decides to look into this Francois who showed up at this farm, and he basically goes to the South Side. He's asking around, trying to like place a bet and like throwing Francois' name around in the community there, trying to get that. And he gets sent to see a Haitian man who will be the only who's everyone's just like, go see this Haitian guy. He's the only one who will like help you. Just got to buy a lucky number off of him.
Played by
crazy, right? A very brief appearance by Scatman Carruthers.
Yeah, great actor. I think mostly known for The Shining and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is where I know him best from. And he has to do a sort of Haitian facsimile of an accent.
So Kolchak goes there and he's trying to like pepper him for information about Francois. But as he's doing that, before he gets any information, another gentleman pops in. I believe his name is Bernard, perhaps? I didn't write down. His name is Sweet Stick Whedon, is basically.
Yeah, his nickname
goes by
Sweet
Sweet Stick. And basically, Sweet Stick is, quote, Duke of the South Side Numbers Fiefdom, which is a thing that I guess Kolchak came up for him when he wrote an article about organized crime on the South Side, and Sweet Stick did not appreciate the moniker.
Yeah, and what you get is you get a sense right off the bat that there's two major, essentially organized crimes that are conflicting and fighting over. I don't know if it's fighting over an area or they just fight over Chicago, and it's the Syndicate and the Black Numbers operations, and Sweet Stick is sort of in charge of the Black Numbers operations, and he's a very sharp dresser.
Yes, very sharp dresser. And he basically arrives to tell Kolchak, it's like, stop asking around about Francois. I've heard what you're trying to do, and leave this story alone. Like, we don't want to have any more of it. And of course, he gets tossed out. He gets thrown out on his keister out in the street. But that doesn't stop Kolchak. He goes to meet an informant he knows named The Monk.
Maybe I'm going to feel different as it goes on. I didn't think this worked at all. And they go back twice, and it seemed like the most obvious way to fill in a hole, like a plot hole.
That's all it is.
In an issue. But it's like, so what it is you get the same shot twice in this episode, which is it's sort of a back alley up a fire escape, and there's a man wearing a cloak, and Kolchak goes to him and over voiceover gets in the information that he needs that'll essentially lead him to the next step. But I was like, what? Like, are you guys serious? Like, this is how you're doing it? And they do it twice, but it's like, I guess it's interesting that he's this mysterious informant, but I'm like, you guys have to build that up in some way or give me more than just, there's a guy who gives me answers sometimes. Anyways, I have the answer now. It's like, come on, you're better than that.
It was very much a plot hole filler more than anything.
It just seems so unnecessary for a show that is well written. You don't need to be that clumsy, you know?
At any rate, this Monk points Kolchak toward a meeting between Sweet Stick and the boss of this syndicate, who they're meeting at a parking garage that night. So Kolchak sneaks in there, sets up his tape recorder, and basically gets to hear the meeting, which is basically the syndicate is accusing Sweet Stick of breaking the backs of their men, and what they feel like is he's coming after their territory, basically. of course, Sweet Stick's just like, I'm not doing any of that. I'm not paying you reparations for anything. Goodbye.
Yeah.
It's at this point that, like, nothing's solved there, but as the syndicate's getting ready to leave, Kolchak somehow pushes play on the tape recorder he was using, so it makes a noise, and so that Kolchak can just get caught. It's a really weak piece of theater to get.
It's similar to in the previous episode where he just screams and falls out of the closet. It's the same thing where they're just like, we need him to get caught, so here's a reason. And the reason is, for whatever reason at that exact moment, he's like, I want to make sure this recordings works. It's like, he wouldn't do that. It's already done. Go check that at the office. But they need something.
I won't. It's not that I'm not saying that Kolchak isn't incompetent at times and a bit of a slapstick fool, but like this one just didn't work. Like it didn't play. It was just like it felt like such like a lazy reason to get him caught.
Yeah, but so what it is he gets caught. He gets brought up to the big like Italian
big
mob
Italian
boss
stereotype.
Guy. Yeah, and basically he's like, oh, I guess we'll just kill him, and so he has to try to talk his way out of it. And what he basically says is he gives him his theory, which is that Francois Edmonds, right? Is that his name?
Yes.
Francois Edmonds. Is that, like, here's a guy you've already killed. You know this. So why don't we do this? If we dig up his grave and his body's not there, you let me go. Because that's, I have this.
Yeah. I've proved this is the guy who's breaking the backs of your men. It's not Sweet Stick. I like it's this guy, and I'll prove it by we'll go dig up his grave. And it's great. They cut to it, and Kolchak's being forced to dig up a grave, which is very funny.
There's something funny though I liked here, and it was a bit of a callback to this weird character we meet a couple scenes previously, which is they were in a cemetery earlier, and there's a groundskeeper who was just being like a little bit annoying about like union rules.
He was very obsessed with union rules. You can't do things without union approval.
Yeah, so you're just like, oh, that's an odd throwaway line. But then later, so Kolchak's digging up the grave, and this guy comes back, this groundskeeper, and he's like, hey, you guys can't dig here at night. And then hard cut to the mob has made him also dig the grave, and I was like, that's pretty funny. That was good.
It was a cute bit. I mean, the character was only there for that bit, but it worked. It was very funny being like, you can't do that. It's against union rules. Cut. He's digging the grave too.
Yeah.
At any rate, they dig up the grave. They open the coffin. It's completely empty except for a chicken. And it's at this
it was so also because it's so dark. I don't think that reveal played that well because I was like,
no, I know.
What was it? A broom? What was it? Oh, it's a chicken. Okay.
Yeah. And the mafia is like, oh, his body is gone. At which point, the zombie of Francois lumbers out of the fog, grabs another goon, and snaps its back.
Yeah.
And it's like not a great shot sequence, but like the goon gets his back snapped. The other mafia guys run away. Kolchak, for some reason, is now stuck in the grave with the dead body laying over top of him. And then you hard cut, and Kolchak's at a police station. Apparently, the police showed up immediately afterward. Kolchak was arrested for, I believe it's grave desecration and suspected theft of a corpse.
Yeah, that's right.
And Vincenzo has to bail him out again.
Oh, I think, by the way, I think the reason he can't get out of the grave is that they've dug so low to get the coffin that he can't get back out. He can't get back out.
Although that grave digger's missing for some reason, so I don't know what happened.
Yeah, he probably got killed too.
But basically what it is Kolchak is now like, he's certain, like there's a zombie on the loose, and he's able to use his monk friend again to get the contact information for the zombie's grandmother. Mm-hmm. And he goes to visit her. And she's just like, yeah. I definitely dug up my grandson's body, but it was just so I could cremate him in a traditional ceremony. I have nothing to do with any sort of zombieism. And like, Kolchak's kind of freaked out by her because she's a bit of a quote unquote medicine woman or something. And she offers to give him a potion to help with his like bad back or something.
She also is acting slightly suspicious. Like she seems almost too confident. So it's giving away that she's saying all the right things, but there's something not right.
And Kolchak's freaked out by it because when he gets to the door, before he even knocks, she's just like, Kolchak, come on in. So he's very freaked out by her. So he sneaks around back of her house after meeting with her and hides in her zombie shack, her voodoo shack she's got built in the backyard.
Yeah, he's basically up in the rafters looking down, and he can see that she's doing some sort of ceremony. She's got a
ritual.
Yeah, ritual of sorts, which seems to be using the blood of a chicken. And again, in this world, this is some sort of voodoo thing she's doing.
She's got tiny little wooden coffins that's she's gotten somewhere.
That's right.
And in blood written on them are the names of basically on the zombies hit list. And what she does is she adds Kolchak's name to one of those. She's like, well, Kolchak, you're on the zombies hit list now too. And cut to Kolchak, eyes bugging out of his head like, oh, no.
Yeah.
It's at this point that a police captain comes down to the newspaper office and he starts threatening the newspaper with all kinds of fire code violations because he basically is trying to get Kolchak to stop looking into this investigation. And we've seen this cop pop up a few times this episode, but it's in this scene we basically get the reveal that it's just like, oh, this cop has kind of like is so invested in this is because he's apparently in the syndicate's pocket. He's a bit of a crooked cop who helps the syndicate cover stuff up. He probably had something to do with the death of Francois, and he really wants this story dropped.
Yeah, he wants the story dropped because he doesn't want to be implicated at all. So he's going to find reasons to get Kolchak off the case. And what he's doing is he's like, basically he's implying, look, we're going to shut down this entire newspaper through bureaucratic red tape if you guys don't stop.
Yeah. But Kolchak tells him, he's like, if you want this to stop, you should read this book I'm reading. I figured out a ritual to stop a zombie. You need to equip every cop with rock salt, a needle and thread, and some candles.
And so what he basically says is what they have to do is catch the guy when he's dormant, is what he says. So when he's essentially asleep, pour salt into his mouth, sew the mouth shut, and then I think it was light candles around him.
Yeah, you light white candles around him, and that will like break the zombie curse or whatever.
Yeah.
And this is essentially set up actually what Kolchak wants to do now because he knows he's on the zombies hit list. He's just like, I just got to stop the zombie now. Everything else is out the window. And he's just like, I've got an idea. I'll go to the Syndicate Supper Club where I know the mob boss hangs out, and hopefully I can catch the zombie there. But he arrives a little too late. As he gets there, the boss and all his goons have had their back snapped, Bane style, like Batman, just all back snapped.
It is funny. He does have one move. It's just grab. Like I assume he just grabs him by the head and the legs and just bends.
Yeah, I think absolutely he just bends them in half.
Yeah,
and so Kolchak's too late, but he happens to spot the zombie boarding a bus leaving the scene of the crime, which I was just like amazing.
Yeah, it was weird for a couple of reasons, but I didn't. Maybe I just missed the scene. I didn't actually see the zombie get on the bus, so I didn't know what was happening.
I don't think you do see it.
So you're like supposed to just know that the zombie had change or a token or whatever it is, and he just gets on the bus. You just have
to trust Kolchak knows what he's doing because Kolchak like grabs all his gear and he runs and jumps on the back bumper of the bus and rides on the back bumper of the bus, which I thought was very funny as well.
Yeah. So he rides. The bus goes very slow, by the way, and they arrive at like
Darren McGavin's very old. You can't go too fast.
He's right. So they arrive at like a old what do you call it? A scrapyard, exactly. A scrapyard with a lot of cars. Which, by the way, why do film and TV use scrapyards so often? Is there just something? There's just something visually interesting about them because it's the like just by me saying scrapyard exactly what this looks like, right? It's cars piled up. It's all kind of rubbly, and you gotta go in between cars, and it's it's like a bit of a maze.
It's stacked up cars. I mean, I will say the one thing I did like about how Kolchak used the scrapyard, like they do this all like very late at night, so it's actually very in shadows, and there is like an element of like weirdness to the scrapyard because they're not shooting it in broad daylight. Like it does feel like you're in a bit of a weird maze, but. Kolchak wanders through the scrapyard because the zombie's gotten off the bus. He eventually finds the zombie resting in an old hearse. And that zombie looks very rotted. I don't know how that zombie got on the bus.
That's the thing. It's the first time you see the zombie, and he looks like he's being dug up. Like he looks like a dead body.
He looks like he's been dead longer than a week.
So it is funny, though. It's like, I'm like, did he specifically choose a junkyard so that he could find a hearse because it's a car that delivers dead bodies? Is that why he was in the hearse?
That is... Early in that early scene where Kolchak's explaining how to break the zombie curse, he does say that the zombie can only rest in a place of the dead. So typically they like go back to so they usually go back to a graveyard or something like that. And what this is just like where he's gone is a scrapyard because there's an old hearse, which is a place of the dead. So that's where it can rest.
Right. So
it's a long walk, but whatever.
Well, we get a good scene though, which is so the dead body's laying in this hearse. And Kolchak has all his stuff. He has his salt and everything ready. And he has to kind of crawl on top of the body, sort of straddle him so he can put the salt in his mouth. And you do get the sense of like, I actually thought the tension was pretty well done.
Oh, the score is amazing.
Yeah.
The lighting's really good. And Darren McGavin is just like, his portrayal of Kolchak is like halfway between coward and just like gung-ho moron. So like, He's going in there, and he's quite clear he does not want to be crawling over this body, and he hates every second of it, but he just knows he has to do it. So it's like it's a really well done scene, and I'm just like, why aren't there more great scenes like this one?
Yeah, when this show nails it, they really do nail it, and this is a good scene. And I honestly, it's funny. Is this a 40-year-old show? And I actually still felt the tension of like, oh no, I know what's going to happen. You as a viewer know the zombie's going to wake up at a certain point, but is he going to be able to get the salt in his mouth and everything? So that's what happens. He pulls out the salt. He starts pouring it in the zombie's mouth. He grabs his needle and thread to start tying the mouth in, and as soon as he goes for it, the zombie's eyes open, and you're like, uh-oh, game over.
Yeah, exactly. You're just like, uh-oh. And then, like, it's great because the zombie's eyes open, and he is, like, scared as you would, like, his reaction is, it's not like one of these things where someone has a manly scream or anything. Like, he gives the most snivelly little screamy scream, like, falls out of the back of the hearse and starts running.
Well, and there's something that I think the show does well in both episodes we've seen, which is the adversary that they give him is much, much more powerful than he is physically in both episodes. So you know right off the bat that he can't overcome this person physically. So what is his response? He's just got to run away because he can't fight this guy.
100%. It is good. Like, I love his reaction. Like, it feels right for the character. Like, it is one of these few things where I'm just like, when the show works, it really works.
Yeah.
But so basically he's running through this dimly lit scrapyard, and essentially he's able to basically, as he's running over cars, there's I guess from a crane, a steel cable in a loop. It just happens to be hanging nearby. He manages to trap the zombie in this steel loop. So the zombie's now like stuck in it. He can't get free because it's like a zombie, and it's like sort of floating in midair, and he's basically able to like grab the candles and complete the ritual to stop the zombie, essentially. Like it's a little muddled, partly because it's so dark and partly because it's like the last episode.
Yeah,
kind of
you have
randomly.
Yeah, it's weird to say in an episode of a zombie, but you have to kind of suspend your disbelief a little bit, like that this guy would trip in the exact way to get caught into this noose, as it were, and be hanging above stuff so that he could light these candles. And you're like, okay, that ended really quickly and conveniently, but, you know, we only have a couple minutes left.
In some ways, it's like what you wanted in the last episode. It's like we saw him executing a plan that went wrong, and then he had to improvise. Whereas the last episode where he was just like, we have no idea what his plan was, but apparently it went perfectly.
Yeah, right. But anyways, he's able to, for all intents and purposes, kill the already undead zombie voodoo guy.
Yeah, he breaks the curse and the zombie is defeated. And like the last episode, we cut back to the newspaper office. Kolchak's monologuing the wrap up to the case for us. And he explains that the zombie damaged his camera, so now there is no evidence of police corruption. I was just like, wait, what? Was that a thing that was happening?
I know. It kind of got lost somewhere along the episode where that was the like C plot of having that the cop knew what was happening, and maybe he didn't mind that the hoods were getting knocked off because it helped not implicate him or something. There was something to that effect that got lost in the edit or in an earlier draft where you're like, oh, that's not what we were watching. That the camera, like if he had any photos, it would have just been of a dead body.
Yeah, I was just like, you had no evidence of that. And then he says the grandmother of the zombie was deported to Haitian. I'm like, I guess for unrelated reasons. Like, I'm like, why?
Yeah, I think they're worried that like, oh, this is going to keep going. Oh, let's get rid of this lady. She's off to Haiti.
Yeah, the network just like, we got to wrap up all these plots. I'm like, I don't think you did. And then after she says that, and after we've already been told the cops are going to get away with corruption, he says the corrupt police captain was relieved of duty for health reasons. And I'm just like, also unrelated to this plot?
Yeah, again, it was sort of a, I think someone else knew he was a corrupt cop but wanted to save face, so they're going to say that. But it's like, what? I think you're just supposed to know there's corruption in the police. That's basically what you're supposed to know.
And his final beat, which is actually, this was the best beat, even though it is kind of this weird thing where he never gets to write any of these stories, which I guess is the point. It's like, if he could prove there were supernatural things, that would change the world. But his final plot is he's like, and if you're hearing my story and you don't believe me, why don't you take yourself down to the cemetery and dig up that grave? What you'll find is a man with salt in his mouth and his mouth sewn shut. But they'll never tell you that on the news.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a nice little beat where he's just like, you don't have to believe me, but if you don't, go dig up that grave.
Yeah. It was a very X-Files-esque kind of end, I thought.
Absolutely. But it is kind of funny. It's just like every episode he just doesn't get to write the story, I guess.
Yeah, I know. That was my point at the beginning of this. It's like, I guess that's what we're going to have every episode, is that he ends up just having to answer those Dear Emily letters.
I mean, I'll give you a little final note on this, and it I think is one of the weaker points of this episode is you don't get to see the zombie really, and I mean, I get it, like it's kind of like the last episode, they're trying to hide the monster till the end, but when you do finally see the zombie, they hired an an American Football League player named Earl the Tree Faison to play this guy. And when you finally see the zombie, he is huge and like so menacing and so made up to be a rotting corpse. Like it really works in a way I was just like, oh man, I could have used more of this football player because he is great in this role.
I think the what they have to do is they have to play it in the shadows a little bit, because if you see the zombie too much, it probably won't look quite right. So they're just like, save it to the end.
Yeah. I was just like, it was kind of weird where I was like, I understand why they did it, but when you finally see him, I was just like, I think you could have used more of this, because I never got the sense of his scale until the end of until the end of the show, where I really realized how large this zombie was, and truly nightmarishly big.
And you know what else was missing from the second episode? Updike.
Yeah, no Updike. He wasn't here again. I'm assuming he'll be back, but maybe not. Maybe he was a one-off.
I think so too. I think he's going to be back, but I was kind of like, I was hoping even a couple scenes of this man that we're supposed to just dislike. I wanted more scenes with him.
Yeah, I think these first 2 episodes, which are fine, like I know it's early, the first 2 episodes of the show, it's just like I kind of like, I'm getting a sense of the world and the style, but now I need to get more of a sense of like, who are the repeating characters? Like, what's the rest of this? Let's build out some more characters in this world, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, that's probably a good point. Do you want to get into rating these? This new
absolutely.
show. Let's see how we're starting.
How did you feel about the pilot, The Ripper?
I liked it, maybe even more so than it deserved, because I went in blind and I was really pleasantly surprised about all the things we've mentioned. I really liked it. I thought it was fun. I thought it was surprisingly fast and modern. I'm going to give it a 7.5. I really quite liked it.
7.5. Here's the thing is, this show is just like, has style for days. Like it just feels like a world, and there's like a weird style to it, and the dialogue can sparkle at times, and the lead character is so watchable. I, however, have watched the TV movie and the second TV movie, and the first TV movie is about a zombie on the loose killing women who's basically very similar, like superhuman. He's fighting through cops. He's like, it's one of the things that shocked me about the TV movie that I was like, well, this is amazing. It's just like they hide him, but they don't necessarily hide his power. Like he's punching his way through cops at periods of time where I was like blown away. This was like how they chose to go with this. And then the sequel to it, I should say, the end of it all takes place in a rotted out old house, almost identical to the end of the pilot. And then the sequel to the TV movie is basically like, they're like, oh, that worked. People liked it. Here's a lot more money, but it's still the same. This time it's about a guy who has lived forever, who needs to kill women to take some of their organs in order to keep living forever. And it's the exact same plot, exact same movement of a thing. And it's just kind of a remake of the original movie with more money. So I wasn't shocked to see that the pilot is essentially a remake of the first 2 movies. The problem is just like, it's the worst of the 3 because like the plot doesn't quite line up. Like, why is that whole ending go that way? Like it felt like they had told the story too many times to kind of had run out of moves to make with it. So because I watched the first 2, I felt a little more like I still like the character. I think I love seeing it in Chicago. I thought the style was still there, but I was also just like, this is the worst version of this version of this thing that I've seen a few times. So I'm a little torn on it. I'm gonna give it a 6. I think it's a 5, but I like the world, so I'm gonna give it a 6. It just doesn't help that I saw those first 2, so I think I'm punishing it a little for that. But I think coming in fresh, it was probably a little fresher for you. But it's just too bad. I'm just like, I've seen this story told twice before. Better. Right.
Fair enough. Well, so what do you think about the zombie, the second episode?
I like this show. I like the characters. The zombie is almost an identical plot to the pilot. Like it's a supernatural being of superpowers, which is cool on a rampage. And they switched it up a little by now is a revenge plot getting back at the Syndicate, which gave me some extra information and stuff. But because we watched these back to back, I'm just like, this is still the same episode. And it does it like when it clicks, like when they're in that, when he's pouring the stuff and doing the ritual, it's so good. It's such a good show. And then there's just like periods where just like, I'm like, you guys, like, why is Monique in this episode? Like, why didn't you use her? Like, it's such an easy win. That was such an easy win for you. And you totally flunked it. So again, I feel very similar. So I think I'm just going to give it a 5.5. Like just because I just saw everything, I guess I'm just going to go down half a point.
I agree with you on all that. I mean, I think the slight difference is that I've only watched 2 episodes. I did feel like, I hope in the third episode there's we find a different type of villain. So we find a different aspect to Kolchak's personality in terms of how he ends up winning. It's not going to be just through a Home Alone type apparatus, But I still did like it. I didn't think it was as good as the pilot, weirdly, for me. So I'm gonna only drop down a little bit. I think this could have been way more offensive than what it was, and I know that's a weird compliment to give, but it could have been much worse, and we've seen these things done much less sensitively. So I'm gonna give it a 6.5 out of 10. I still like the show, and I'm really hoping that the episodes get better and that they grow.
Here's the thing, I like the show too, and I'm like, I hope the next few episodes just like travel to some new plot. Like, honestly, I would say the only issue the show has is that the plots are kind of like middling. Mm-hmm. Like, everything else is really firing. Just like the actual plots themselves just were like good setups that they just never quite coalesced into anything, or didn't get as good as they could have gotten. It was just weird. I'm just like, it's so weird to watch a show for us and be like, everything's really working except these plots are kind of like, they could be better.
Well, the next episode, I'm just looking ahead. It's about a powerful invisible entity. So I don't know if that's going to change anything.
Everything is just some sort of powerful entity he has to fight.
Yeah. So,
well, I guess we'll find out.
I'm hopeful for a couple episodes. Sometimes we start these shows and you watch the first couple and you're like, oh no, this is going to be a slog. I don't feel that way. This show may get worse, and it may get, as you've sort of feeling, is that it's sort of running over the same ground. I think that might be its greatest sin, but I'm still hopeful that it's going to kind of surprise us along the way.
Yeah, it feels like the talent is involved to really push this somewhere interesting. I'm hoping that maybe just like they had to do these villain of the weeks because that was the case of what you needed to do at the time, and maybe a few episodes in, they'll start breaking that formula a little because they're like run out of villains of the week to do interestingly. And we might get, because like I feel like there's a lot of potential, so I'm hoping we'll see more from the show.
I agree. Well, we'll have to see in subsequent episodes.
All right. Well, in the meantime, on Instagram and Twitter, you can find some clips from the show. There's some fun stuff in the show, so we'll definitely have some good clips.
There's zombies with salt in your mouth. You got guys jumping off and killing women with swords.
all the hits. Yeah. And of course, you can email us at continuumdrag@gmail.com if you have any thoughts or feelings to send us. I don't know why. Maybe you will. And that about wraps it up. So, listener, thank you for joining us. And Jordan, I'll see you next week.
See you then. Continuum Drag is recorded in Toronto, Ontario. Theme music by James Rex Seidler. Produced by Jordan Dullock and Luke Black. Special thanks to Aaron Hughes.